But I knew deep down I was getting through. That Ice Queen exterior was starting to melt, even if she didn't realize it yet. "I am willing to test your hypothesis further," Zira said finally, her tone as precise as ever. "If emotional experiences provide insights into human behavior, it is logical for me to continue this." "Experiment," I raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Experiment? Is that what we're calling it now?" Zira's expression remained unreadable. "I see no other term that accurately describes our interactions. You claim that emotional experiences lead to a deeper understanding. As a scientist, it is my duty to investigate all variables." "Ah, so it's all about research," I teased, stepping closer again. "Well, if you're serious about learning, I'll be more than happy to teach you a thing or two." Her eyes flickered as she took in my approach, and for a second I thought she might step back. But instead she stood her ground, her expression unwavering. "I believe I can handle whatever." "Lessons you intend to impart?" I grinned. "Oh, I've got plenty of lessons. Some might be." Hands on Zira's brow furrowed slightly, clearly pondering my words. "Everything good?" I asked, leaning casually against the wall, eyes glinting with mischief. "It was routine," she replied, her voice steady. "Now, about this feeling more discussion we were having earlier. I believe you were explaining something about contact." She said it with a straight face, and I couldn't tell if she was messing with me or still taking things literally. "Oh, I said, stepping closer to her, the air between us growing just a little more charged. "But contact is just one part of it. There's a whole range of sensations you've yet to experience." I let the words hang, thick with double meaning, knowing she might not catch on, or maybe she would. Her violet eyes studied me intently, as if she were scanning me for some deeper truth. "Sensations? You mean touch, warmth, and proximity?" she asked, still fully analytical. I leaned in, just a little, enough for her to notice. "That's the basics. But some touches can send a shock right through you. Others might make you tingle." I kept my voice playful, watching for any reaction. Zira didn't flinch, though I swore I saw her eyes flicker just slightly. "Imagine a world where emotions don't exist. No joy, no sadness, no anger, no love. This is how the Zephirians lived. Cold, logical beings from a distant planet. Their entire civilization was built on pure intellect, where decisions were based on facts, not feelings. They viewed emotions as a weakness, a flaw that clouded judgment. And among them was Captain Zira, one of the highest-ranking officers of their fleet. Zira, with her glowing violet eyes and metallic silver skin, was renowned for her strategic brilliance. She had faced countless battles, solved complex problems with ease, and was admired by all of Zetheria. But there was something she could never understand: the strange, illogical behavior of humans, their feelings. That's where I came in. My name's Alex. Just an ordinary guy, or at least I thought so, until fate threw me aboard Zira's ship. A few months ago, during a rare alliance mission between humans and Zephirians, I was selected as a liaison to help bridge our two cultures. It wasn't long before I met Zira. Tall, poised, and completely unreadable. "You humans are curious creatures," she said one day, her eyes studying me like I was some kind of puzzle. "Hands-on? You mean tactile stimuli?" "Physical contact seems to have a significant role in these so-called emotional experiences," I chuckled, leaning in, our faces mere inches apart again. "Yeah, it's all about the touch. But it's not just any touch, it's knowing when and where." Zira. Timing's everything. She blinked, trying to piece it together. "So the emotional response is dependent on the location and duration of contact." "Oh, absolutely," I said, my voice dropping lower as I let my hand lightly brush against her arm again. "Some touches, they linger, making you think about them even after they're gone." Zira's gaze dropped to where my hand made contact with her skin. "Interesting. So if I were to replicate this touch, I would elicit a similar response?" I grinned, genuinely amused by her scientific approach to flirting. "Well, there's only one way to find out, right?" Without hesitation, Zira lifted her hand, placing it on my arm, mimicking the motion I had just demonstrated. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, but I could tell she was trying to analyze every detail, from the warmth of my skin to the way it felt beneath her fingers. "I've seen you laugh, cry, and act irrationally. Why do you waste time with such distractions?" I smirked. "You say that like emotions are bad. They're what make us human. They're what connect us." She tilted her head, her violet eyes narrowing slightly. "Emotions cloud judgment. They are unnecessary for survival." I couldn't help but laugh. You've clearly never fallen in love. Zira's gaze was sharp. Love, another human concept. Explain it to me. Oh boy, how do you explain love to someone who's never felt anything? It's complicated. Love makes you feel things you didn't know you could. It can be confusing, overwhelming, but it's powerful. It's what makes life worth living. Zira was silent, processing my words with her usual logic. Illogical, she finally said. How can something so chaotic be of value? I leaned closer, grinning. You'll never understand unless you feel it, she blinked. Her gaze cool. I have no interest in feeling such irrational emotions, and that's when the idea hit me. A challenge. Could someone like Zira, who had never experienced emotions, actually feel something? What if I could make her feel just one, even for a moment? You mean a physical stimulus that triggers a nervous system response, she stated, still perfectly composed. It's common knowledge among Zephirians. I couldn't help but chuckle. Not quite what I was getting at, Zira. There's a difference between a simple touch and a touch that means something. She crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. What exactly would this meaningful touch involve? I stepped closer again, close enough that I could practically feel the coolness radiating from her. It depends. Some people like to keep it light, playful. Others, well, I let my hand brush against hers, a quick, subtle move. Others like to go deeper. Zira glanced down at my hand, a crease forming in her brow. Deeper in what sense? I smirked. Oh, you know, a touch that lingers, one that stays with you long after it's happened, the kind that makes you think about it when you're alone. She blinked, clearly processing, then nodded as if coming to a conclusion. You're referring to a prolonged emotional effect from physical interaction. I grinned, inching closer until we were nearly chest to chest. Exactly. Though it's not always the hands that do the most. Effective touching. Zira looked up at me, her eyes narrowing slightly as she considered my words. Are you implying there are other parts of the body involved? I bit my lip to keep from bursting out laughing. Yeah, you could say that. You know, lips can be very effective communicators too. There was a pause. Zira's eyes widened ever so slightly, and I could tell she was running 100 calculations in her mind. She tilted her head. Lips. You mean like... Speaking, I couldn't hold back anymore. I laughed, stepping back just a bit. Oh, Zira, you're priceless, she blinked, clearly not understanding why I was laughing. I fail to see what is humorous. You have mentioned lips several times, but I still do not understand their relevance. I smirked. Let me put it this way. Sometimes humans communicate without words. I leaned in, lowering my voice again. And sometimes it's the silence that says everything. Zira stared at me for a long moment, her brow furrowing again. Are you suggesting that humans communicate through silence? I grinned. From that moment on, I made it my mission. Every day I tried to get under her skin. I'd crack jokes, tell stories, even get a little flirty. At first she didn't react at all, just looked at me like I was some strange insect buzzing around her. But slowly, ever so slowly, things started to shift. One day we were walking through the ship's garden, the only spot where some semblance of nature existed in the cold, metal corridors. The Zephirians kept it for scientific purposes, but to me it was a tiny oasis. I leaned against a tree, watching her as she studied a flower. You know, on Earth, giving someone a flower is a sign of affection. Zira glanced at me, raising a brow. Affection, yeah, it's a way of showing you care about someone. She held the flower up, examining it like it was some alien artifact. Why would you give someone a dying organism to express such a thing? I chuckled. It's not about the flower. It's about the meaning behind it. Here, let me show you. I reached out, gently taking her hand and placing the flower in her palm. For a moment our fingers brushed, and I could have sworn I saw something a flicker of. Confusion, maybe? How does this compare? She asked, her voice completely serious, as if this was a normal experiment. I bit my lip, holding back a laugh. Not bad, Zira, but it's not just about copying. You've got to feel it. She tilted her head slightly. Feel it? How I stepped even closer, making sure my voice was low and suggestive. It's not about the mechanics, it's about what's behind it. The intent, the desire. Her brow furrowed again, clearly deep in thought. Desire. Another concept that eludes me. Is it similar to curiosity? I chuckled, shaking my head. Curiosity is part of it. But desire. It's more intense. It's when you want something so badly, it's all you can think about. It drives you. Zira was silent for a moment, her hand still resting on my arm, her eyes locked on mine. And what is it that you desire? Alex, the question caught me off guard, but I recovered quickly, my grin widening. Well, Zira, I think you already know the answer to that. Her gaze didn't waver. I do not. That's why I'm asking. I leaned in even closer, my lips almost brushing her ear. You, Zira. I desire you. She blinked, her expression unreadable, but I saw the slightest flicker of something in her eyes, something new, something she didn't fully understand. You desire me, she repeated, as if trying to make sense of the concept. I nodded, letting my voice drop to a near whisper. Yeah, I want to make you feel things you've never felt before. I want to see what happens when you let go of all that control and just give in. For a long moment, there was silence. Zira's hand was still on my arm, her mind clearly racing with thoughts she wasn't used to dealing with. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. If this is part of your emotional exploration, I am willing to participate. However, I must warn you, I do not fully understand the consequences of such actions. I smiled, brushing a strand of her silver hair behind her ear. That's the best part, Zira. You don't have to understand it. You just have to feel it. She stared at me, her violet eyes searching mine for some hidden meaning. And then, without another word, she stepped closer, closing the distance between us entirely. Not just silence. More like a kiss. The word seemed to land heavily between us. Zira tilted her head slightly. A kiss. I've observed humans exchanging them, it seems. Inefficient, I laughed again, shaking my head. You really have a lot to learn. Kisses aren't about efficiency. They're about connection. You remember how I talked about wanting to feel more? Well, a kiss is one way to feel a lot more. Zira's eyes were locked onto mine, and for a moment I could see the gears turning in her mind. A kiss transmits emotional data, she asked, clearly trying to apply her scientific approach to the concept. I shrugged, keeping my grin. You could say that. It definitely sends a message. She paused, considering. And what message would be sent if I engaged in this activity with you? Oh, now we were getting somewhere. I leaned in again, our faces mere inches apart. Well, you'd be sending a signal that you're curious, that you're ready to feel something deeper. Zira didn't move, her violet eyes boring into mine. And what would I feel? I kept my voice low, playful. You'd feel something you can't measure or calculate. She quickly pulled her hand away, her cool exterior back in place. Interesting custom, she said, though her voice was a little softer than usual. But things really took a turn the day we crash-landed on a nearby moon. The ship had been hit by a rogue asteroid, and we were stranded, just the two of us, waiting for help. As the sun began to set, the temperature dropped rapidly. I wasn't prepared for the cold, and neither was she. We need to stay close, I said, shivering. Body heat and all that. Zira hesitated for a moment before nodding. Logical, we huddled together, her metallic skin surprisingly warm against mine. As we sat there, side by side in the quiet of the moon's night, something shifted. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. This is strange, Zira murmured. What is this sensation? When you're close, I feel something. I turned to look at her, raising an eyebrow. Really? And what does it feel like? She frowned, clearly frustrated with herself. I don't know. It's warm, but not in a physical sense. It's unsettling, I grinned. Sounds like you're starting to feel something. She shot me a glare. Don't be absurd. It's probably just a result of the stress from the crash, but I could see it. There was a crack in her cold, logical exterior. Something was stirring inside her, something she couldn't quite understand. And I wasn't going to stop there. Days passed after we were rescued, and Zira tried to act like nothing had changed, but I could see it in her eyes. She was more curious now, more attentive. She started asking me more questions about emotions, about what it felt like to care for someone, to miss someone, to want someone. One evening, as we stood on the observation deck, looking out at the stars, she turned to me, her expression softer than I'd ever seen. Alex, if I were to feel something, what would that mean for me? I smiled, leaning against the railing. It would mean you're becoming more than just a cold, logical being. It would mean you're starting to understand what it means to be alive. Zira stared at me for a long moment, her violet eyes searching mine. And then, in a rare moment of vulnerability, she whispered, I think, "I want to feel more. The story doesn't end there." No, this was just the beginning. "I am ready," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I grinned, my heart racing just a little faster now. "Oh, Zira, you have no idea what you're getting into," she raised an eyebrow. "Then show me with that." I pulled her closer, my hand resting lightly on her waist. Her body was tense, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she watched me with that same intense curiosity, as if I were an equation she was determined to solve. "You sure you're ready for this?" I teased, my voice low and playful. "I am certain," she replied, her tone serious. "Proceed," I chuckled, shaking my head. "All right, but remember you asked for it." And then, without waiting for her response, I leaned in, pressing my lips against hers once more. This time, though, I didn't hold back. I let the kiss linger, deepening it just enough to make her feel something real. At first, Zira was still, as if processing the sensation. But then, slowly, I felt her start to respond, her lips moving against mine in a way that was both tentative and curious. It was like she was experimenting, trying to understand what this was all about. "Something that stays with you, even when you try to forget it for a long moment." Zira said nothing. She just stared at me, clearly torn between her Zephirian logic and her newfound curiosity. Then, without warning, she leaned forward just slightly, her eyes never leaving mine. "Show me." My heart jumped, but I kept my cool, closing the distance between us even more. Our faces were so close that I could feel her breath, cool and even. Slowly I raised my hand to brush a strand of her silver hair behind her ear, watching for any sign of hesitation. None came. I leaned in, pausing just a breath away from her lips. "You sure about this?" I asked softly, teasingly. "I do not engage in activities without certainty," she replied, her voice steady. But there was a hint of something else, something new. I grinned. "Well then, here's your first lesson on human emotions," and with that, I closed the gap, pressing my lips gently against hers. For a second, she didn't move, like she was trying to process what was happening. But then, slowly, I felt her lips respond, just the slightest bit. It was tentative, unsure, but it was there. And in that moment I knew Zira, the emotionless Zephirian, was starting to feel something real. I had opened a door inside Zira, one she couldn't close. She was beginning to feel something, and I wasn't about to let her turn back. I grinned at Zira's confession. It was subtle, but that crack in her icy demeanor was growing. And now I had the perfect opportunity to push it further, all in good fun, of course. "Oh, you want to feel more?" I teased, leaning a little closer, watching her reaction. Zira's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't pull away. "Don't make this strange, Alex. I am simply curious about human experiences." "Strange," I chuckled. "I'm not the one talking about wanting to feel more. You know, humans usually need a bit of connection to feel everything," I said, deliberately letting my words hang in the air, watching for her reaction. Zira's brow furrowed, clearly not catching the dual meaning yet. Connection. Physical proximity, like during the cold on the moon. I leaned even closer, lowering my voice with a playful smirk. "Oh, physical proximity helps, but there's a lot more to it. Like touching, maybe. Feeling someone's warmth in a way that makes your heart race." The story doesn't end here. Oh no, this is just the beginning, because once you get a taste of emotions, you never go back. As our lips parted, Zira blinked, her violet eyes widening just a fraction, still processing the experience. I leaned back, giving her some space, but I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to analyze what just happened. "Well," I asked with a grin, knowing exactly what I was doing. "How'd that feel? Any emotional data coming through?" Zira was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on me, before finally speaking in her usual calm tone. "The experience was unfamiliar, a new sensation. I can confirm there was a noticeable change in my physiological response." "Oh really?" I teased, stepping closer again. "And what kind of physiological response are we talking about here?" She looked slightly perplexed. My pulse rate increased by 12%, and I felt a slight warmth in my core. "It's unusual." I couldn't help but chuckle. "That's just the beginning, Zira. It's called chemistry. There's a lot more where that came from, but I'm guessing you're not ready for the full lesson yet." When we finally pulled apart, Zira's expression was unreadable, but there was a hint of something new and uncharted in her eyes. "That was different," she said quietly. I grinned. Yeah? How so? She seemed to think for a moment before replying. It evoked a stronger response than I anticipated. My pulse rate increased by 15%, and I felt warmth. It is not entirely unpleasant, not unpleasant, her. I teased, my hand still resting on her waist. Well, we can work on making it more than just not unpleasant. Zira's gaze sharpened. I assume you are referring to further experimentation, I smirked. You catch on quick. She stepped back slightly, her usual cool demeanor slipping back into place. I will need time to analyze these responses, but I am intrigued. I may require additional data. Oh, you'll get plenty of data, Zira, I said, stepping closer again, not willing to let her off the hook just yet. We're just getting started. She raised an eyebrow. I am beginning to understand your persistence, Alex. You truly are relentless in your pursuit of emotional responses. I laughed, shaking my head. What can I say? When I want something, I go all in. Zira's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was a flicker of amusement, just a flicker. Then I suppose we shall see how far this experiment takes us. Oh, trust me, I said with a grin. We're in for one hell of a ride. I grinned at Zira's words, feeling the spark of something more than curiosity in the air between us. She had no idea what she was in for, but I wasn't about to let up now. All right, I said, my voice low and teasing. But don't say I didn't warn you. Zira tilted her head, still studying me like I was some alien specimen, though there was something softer in her gaze now. You've mentioned this before, warning me. Yet, I have not seen anything particularly dangerous so far. I chuckled. Oh, trust me, the dangerous part isn't out there. It's what happens when you start feeling things you didn't know you could. Emotions have a way of messing with your head. Her eyes narrowed, clearly intrigued. And you believe I am susceptible to such disruptions? I think you already are, Captain, I said, moving just a bit closer, my voice dropping. She tilted her head slightly. If additional contact yields more data on emotional responses, then logically, I should pursue further investigation. I raised an eyebrow, amused. Oh, you're eager for more, huh? Careful, you might get more than you bargained for. Zira's eyes narrowed slightly. You're implying there is an element of risk involved. I smirked, leaning in just a bit, making sure my voice was playful yet suggestive. Depends on how deep you're willing to go, Captain. Emotions can be overwhelming if you're not careful. She considered this for a moment, clearly weighing the risks in her mind. I have faced far more dangerous challenges. I believe I can handle whatever emotional effects you are referring to. I laughed, shaking my head. You're really something else, Zira. But all right, if you're up for it, I'm more than happy to be your guide. Just don't say I didn't warn you. She stared at me, unblinking. What exactly are you warning me about? I leaned in again, lowering my voice to a near whisper. That once you start feeling things, it's hard to stop. And sometimes those feelings can take over. Zira blinked, processing my words, still mostly clueless. Are you suggesting an increase in physical contact would enhance emotional responses? I bit back a laugh. Oh, definitely. But it depends on the kind of contact. She seemed to consider this, her analytical mind trying to make sense of what I was implying. So, in order to experience more emotions, I should engage in this type of contact. I raised an eyebrow, amused at how seriously she was taking this. Well, if you're really curious, I could, show you for a moment. There was silence. Zira, ever the logical one, stared at me, her violet eyes searching for some hidden motive. Then, in that cold, calculating tone of hers, she asked, what exactly would you show me? I grinned, barely containing the laughter bubbling up inside. Oh, lots of things. You might even feel something you've never felt before. Zira crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. Explain further. Well, I began, my voice dropping a notch. It involves closeness. Maybe a bit of letting go. I winked, enjoying how this conversation was going, knowing she had no idea how deep into human flirting she was wandering. Make you want things you didn't even know you could want. Her eyes narrowed again, and for the first time I saw a flash of something behind her usual calm exterior. Was it curiosity or something deeper? Either way, I was loving this. I find it hard to believe that emotions could be that powerful, she said, though her tone held the tiniest hint of doubt. I grinned, stepping even closer, our bodies almost touching now. Oh, trust me, I could show you things that would change your entire view of emotions. Things that might make you lose control. Zira raised an eyebrow, clearly still trying to maintain her composure. You speak as if humans are often out of control due to their emotions, I chuckled. Well, it happens more often than you'd think. Sometimes emotions take over and you just have to go with the flow. Sometimes it's more fun to lose control, her gaze sharpened. Fun, I nodded. Yeah, fun. That thing humans have when they're not overthinking everything. Zira was silent, her eyes locked on mine. If what you're saying is true, then emotions might present a danger to one's rational thinking. You're not as logical as you think, Zira blinked, almost as if the idea hadn't occurred to her. That's a bold assumption. It's not an assumption, I replied with a grin, reaching out to trace my fingers lightly down her arm. I've been watching you this whole time, and I've seen it, the way you react, the way your body responds. You might not understand it yet, but trust me, you're feeling something. She was silent for a moment, her eyes flicking to my hand on her arm. Then she spoke, her voice a little softer. Perhaps. But if this is true, what am I to do with these feelings? I smiled, knowing I had her hooked now. You lean into them. You let them take over for once. You let yourself feel, without trying to understand it. Zira's gaze was intense, her violet eyes searching mine for something. And if I do that, what happens next? I leaned in, my lips brushing her ear as I whispered. Everything changes. She shivered slightly, though I wasn't sure if she realized it. But I felt it, the subtle shift in her posture, the way her breath hitched for just a second. She might have been able to control her mind, but her body was starting to betray her. Zira's eyes narrowed again. Letting go. That sounds inefficient, I laughed, shaking my head. It's not about efficiency, Zira. It's about the experience. You'll never understand emotions if you're always trying to control everything. Sometimes you just have to let things happen. She didn't say anything, but I could see her mind working overtime. She was trying to make sense of something that didn't fit into her perfect logical world, and I loved every second of it. You seem amused, Zira noted, her tone slightly suspicious. Oh, I'm definitely amused, I replied, leaning back and crossing my arms. But not for the reasons you think. Then enlighten me, she demanded, her voice as cold as ever, but there was a hint of curiosity. I chuckled. You're so serious, Zira. Sometimes emotions are about having fun. Enjoying the moment. Enjoyment, she repeated, frowning. Another concept I find difficult to comprehend, I smirked. You haven't spent enough time with me? Then she raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting that more time with you will lead to this? Enjoyment, I couldn't resist anymore. I smiled, letting my fingers lightly graze her arm. That's part of the thrill, Zira. Letting go of logic, feeling something without worrying about what it means or how it'll affect you, just being in the moment. She didn't move, but I could see her mind working overtime, trying to process everything. And you believe this? Thrill is beneficial, depends on how you look at it, I replied, my fingers lightly tracing her arm. But I can tell you this, some moments you'll never forget. Especially the ones where you let yourself feel. Zira's gaze drifted down to my hand on her arm, and for a second I thought she might actually be starting to get it. But then she straightened, her usual cool demeanor slipping back into place. I believe I've gathered sufficient data for now, I laughed, stepping back, giving her space. All right, Captain, we'll leave it at that. For now, she gave me a long, calculating look. You are quite persistent, Alex, I smirked. Oh, you have no idea, but that's because I know there's something inside you, Zira, something you're trying to fight, but it's only a matter of time before you feel it fully. Oh, definitely. Stick around, and I promise, I'll show you things that'll make you feel all kinds of things. I let my voice drop just enough to add a hint of something else to my words. Zira blinked, and for the first time there was a tiny flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Your words often seem to have more than one meaning. Alex, I grinned, feeling victorious. What can I say? Human language is complex. Just like emotions, she stared at me, clearly trying to decide if she was being tricked. After a long pause, she finally spoke. I will admit, I am intrigued. That's the spirit, I said, patting her shoulder lightly. Intrigue is the first step to feeling more. Zira's eyes flicked down to my hand on her shoulder before slowly raising to meet mine. You're enjoying this far too much. Oh, you have no idea, I teased, my grin widening. And don't worry, Zira. We'll keep exploring these feelings together. After all, you did say you wanted to feel more. Before she could reply, the ship's communication system buzzed, and an alert flashed on the screen. Incoming transmission from the Zephirian High Command, the robotic voice announced. Zira pulled back slightly, her expression unreadable once again. You speak as if emotions are a force beyond control, I shrugged, stepping back to give her space. Sometimes they are. But that's part of the thrill, isn't it? Letting go, not knowing where things are going to end up. For a moment she was silent, processing everything. Then, to my surprise, she smiled a small, almost imperceptible smile, but a smile nonetheless. "You are very confident, Alex, I like to think so," I replied, smirking. "But then again, you make it easy to be confident." Her smile faded slightly, her expression growing serious once more. "And if I were to fully embrace these emotions, what would that look like?" I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the question. "Well, that depends on how far you're willing to go, Captain." She stepped closer again, her eyes locked on mine. "I am willing to go as far as necessary to understand these feelings, to fully experience what you've described." I could feel the tension rising between us, the air charged with something electric. This wasn't just about curiosity anymore, this was something more, something real. Her eyes flickered with something again. Was it frustration? Or maybe anticipation? Either way, I could tell I was getting to her. "You seem confident in your ability to evoke emotional responses," she said, her voice as calm as ever, though there was a slight edge to it now. "Let's just say I'm good at what I do," I replied with a wink. "And when it comes to teaching someone how to feel, well, I've got plenty of tricks up my sleeve." Zira raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by my bravado. "We will see how effective your methods truly are." "Oh, we will," I said, leaning in just a little, our faces close again. "But don't worry, Zira. I'll make sure you feel everything." Eventually, for a moment, there was silence between us, the air charged with something unspoken. I could see the battle in her eyes, the logical part of her mind struggling against the new emotion she didn't fully understand. And I knew in that moment that this was far from over. Because once you start playing with emotions, things only get more intense. Zira stared at me for a moment longer, her cool, analytical eyes trying to dissect my intentions. And I could tell Zira was ready to push beyond the limits she had set for herself. I reached out, gently cupping her face, my thumb brushing lightly across her cheek. "You sure about that?" Her eyes didn't waver. "I am certain." Without another word, I closed the distance between us, pulling her into a kiss that was deeper, more intense than before. This time Zira didn't hesitate. Her hands found their way to my shoulders, her body pressing against mine in a way that felt different. There was no calculation, no analysis, just pure, raw emotion. And that's when I knew I had her. We broke the kiss, both of us breathless, and I could see it in her eyes, the confusion, the uncertainty, but also in the desire. The logical, cold exterior she'd maintained for so long was finally starting to crack. "That was," Zira began, her voice unsteady. "Yeah," I replied, still grinning. "Told you it'd get intense." She took a deep breath, clearly trying to regain her composure. "I see now why emotions can be overwhelming. They consume you," I nodded. "But sometimes that's not a bad thing. Sometimes it's exactly what you need." Zira was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant as she processed everything. Zira immediately straightened, her cool, professional demeanor slipping back into place. "I must take this shore, Captain. But don't think you're getting off that easy," I called after her as she headed toward the console. She paused for a moment, glancing back at me with those violet eyes, and for just a second, I thought I saw something. A spark of curiosity, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. This was just the beginning. Zira might be trying to resist, but I knew I was getting under her skin. Slowly but surely I was making her feel, and I couldn't wait to see where this strange, playful journey would take us next, because this story, it's far from over. As Zira turned back to the console to handle the incoming transmission, I leaned back, watching her with a smirk. Her precision, her control, it was all part of her charm, though she'd never admit it. Still, I knew that underneath that cold, calculated exterior, she was starting to crack. And honestly, that was half the fun. The transmission ended sooner than I expected, and Zira returned, her expression unreadable as usual. Then she looked at me, her expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "You've made your point, Alex." "I understand now." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by her admission. "Oh yeah," she nodded, stepping closer once again. "Yes, and I believe there is more to explore." "More too," I smirked, pulling her closer. "Oh, Captain, you have no idea. We've barely scratched the surface." Her eyes locked onto mine, and this time there was no hesitation. Then perhaps it's time to dive deeper, I grinned, leaning in for another kiss. Now you're speaking my language. As our lips met once more, I knew that this was only the beginning. Zira had finally opened herself up to something she couldn't control, something unpredictable, wild and thrilling. And I was more than ready to show her just how far those feelings could go. But for now we were lost in the moment, the world around us fading into the background as we let ourselves get carried away by something far stronger than logic or reason. Emotions had finally taken over, and neither of us was looking back.